Warmest spots, I think, towards Cardiff, something like 19 Celsius, mid-teens generally elsewhere, 12 to 14 for northern Scotland. Into the evening, clear spells for many once again. For northern Scotland, we'll see thicker cloud arriving and some showery rain. That will push into southern Scotland by the end of the night, reaching Northern Ireland, northwest England and North Wales by dawn. With that cloud cover, it's not going to be quite as chilly on Sunday morning, but still temperatures in many places dipping into the single figures, and still some sunshine in the south on Sunday morning. And the cloud in the north will tend to break up, so sunny spells here as well. But for many, Sunday's looking like a cloudier day, and there will be some showers affecting western Scotland, northwest England, North Wales and Northern Ireland at times. Monday looks similar, a lot more cloud cover, temperatures perhaps a degree or so higher.
On Mark Dolan tonight, it's our first time on air with this programme since the very sad news broke about the passing of Her Majesty. So in my big opinion monologue, my personal tribute to our late great Queen Elizabeth. And I've got some things to say that you won't have already heard. With me throughout the show, a man who knew her intimately well, Princess Diana and William and Harry's former personal bodyguard, Ken Wharf, live in the studio. Ken will be at the funeral on Monday as well. We'll also speak to football legend Luther Blissett, awarded an OBE by the Queen this summer. Former Royal Guard Tony Curran, who danced with the great lady no less. Plus the Queen of US Royal Reporting, Kinsey Schofield, on how the news of the Queen's passing is going down in the United States. Plus my brilliant panel reacting to the latest developments in the run-up to Monday's funeral. And the papers with full panel reaction at 10:30. In my take at 10, it's time the underrated Princess Anne gets a right royal promotion. So hear all about that at 10 o'clock. I'm going to be bigging up Princess Anne. Our emotions tonight are one of sadness that we've lost the Queen and joy that we had her in the first place. Plus, we've got all of the latest from that queue. Surely the longest queue in history. Greg, have you got an update? Let's have a look. We're hoping to go live to the queue throughout the evening. Thousands of people seeking to pay their respects to Her Majesty. We'll fire up QCam a little bit later. So a busy 2 hours to come. My personal tribute to the Queen next, but first the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Now from Westminster Hall, where a steady flow of people continues to move past the Queen's coffin. The queue for those waiting to file past is now at least 22 hours. Well, earlier today, the King and Queen consort visited Wales. That's the King's first visit to the nation as monarch. Thousands of well-wishers lined the streets of Cardiff to catch a glimpse of the both of them. The trip is the final part of his tour of the four nations as king. At the Welsh Parliament, he received a motion of condolence and spoke of his mother's love for the country. The Prince and Princess of Wales met with Commonwealth troops earlier today at the Army Training Centre Purbright. The troops have been deployed to assist in the Queen's funeral on Monday. The Royals met with senior representatives from Canada, Australia and New Zealand to thank them for their assistance. Well, in other news, authorities in Ukraine investigating evidence of a mass grave near the eastern city of Izium say most of the people buried there are civilians. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The city in the Kharkiv region has recently been liberated after 6 months of Russian occupation. The UN Human Rights Office is planning a trip to verify claims that at least 450 bodies are buried there. The Kremlin is denying targeting civilians or committing war crimes. But President Zelensky says an investigation is underway with international assistance and that there is evidence of Russian war crimes in those areas.
Unfortunately, this looks like a bloody soap opera. After Bucha, we're seeing similar sights in deoccupied regions of our country. In Izium, we found 450 dead people buried. But there are others, separate burials of many people, tortured people, entire families in certain areas.
TV online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. In a busy 2 hours, my first public comments about the passing of Queen Elizabeth. That's a big opinion special coming in just 1 minute's time. With me throughout the show, a man who knew the woman intimately well, Princess Diana and William and Harry's former personal bodyguard, Ken Wharf. Ken's live in the studio right through until 11. We'll also speak to football legend Luther Blissett, awarded an OBE by the Queen this summer, former Royal Guard Tony Curran, who danced with the Queen no less, plus the Queen of US Royal Reporting, Kinsey Schofield, on how the news of the Queen's passing is going down in the United States. Just how many Americans will be watching that funeral on Monday. Plus, my brilliant panel reacting to the latest developments in the run-up to Monday's funeral, and the papers with full panel reaction live at 10:30. Very excited about my panel tonight. We have none other than Linda Duberly, award-winning broadcaster. We've also got brilliant radio legend Neil Fox and author and presenter Laura Dodsworth. In my take at 10, it's time the underrated Princess Anne gets a right royal promotion. That's right, it's all about Anne after 10. And I want to hear from you throughout the show. Your views are my priority. Mark at gbnews.uk. Let's start with this. It's this programme's first time on air since the deeply sad news of the Queen's passing, so I hope you'll forgive me for saying a few words. This shy, humble woman was thrust into the spotlight at the age of 25. Incredibly, the first Prime Minister who reported to her as monarch was Winston Churchill. It was 1952 and this young princess was now being briefed on a weekly basis by a giant of British politics and public life, Churchill himself. Britain was still dealing with the economic, military, infrastructural and societal fallout from the Second World War. The country was healing whilst seeking a new role in a changing world. The Queen would become the face of a new post-war Britain. She was to be the glue that held this country together. On her watch, prim and proper 1950s Britain edged its way out of rationing and austerity into the swinging 60s. And modern housing developments, the white heat of technology, motorways, new towns, shopping centres, the Beatles and the contraceptive pill. Elizabeth was on our banknotes for the multiple financial crises of the 1970s, including the winter of discontent and that humiliating moment in 1976 when Britain faced near bankruptcy and had to go with its begging bowl to the International Monetary Fund to borrow billions. She was on the same banknotes that saw an economic boom in the 1980s. The first Prime Minister that really challenged her authority was Margaret Thatcher, who thought she was the Queen too, and they were thought not to get on. She was here for the entirety of our relationship with the EU, 47 years. And she was our monarch when full sovereignty was restored to these islands when we completely left on the 1st of January 2020. She was the pandemic queen, of course, continuing where possible to perform her litany of daily duties in spite of the COVID restrictions. and she had to mourn the loss of her beloved Philip at the height of the pandemic. You'd need a heart of stone and the absence of a pulse not to have been moved by that now famous photograph of our late Queen sitting all by herself in St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. Well, on Monday, she will return to Philip's side when she too is laid to rest in Windsor. Duty and protocol were the abiding themes of her reign. The Queen was strong and principled. She was tough, firm. She was a woman of substance, but she was elegant and feminine too. No one rocked a dress, hat and coat combo quite like Her Majesty. And she had a stunning smile. What can I say? She always looked like a queen. And she was box office too, around the world. Most countries have to muddle along with elected heads of state who are normally clapped out ex-politicians or tired public figures. The person representing us was one of the most globally recognised people on the planet. When she visited France, she wasn't staying at the Georges V Hotel. She was in the Élysée Palace. In Washington, she wasn't put up in a five-star outfit. She stayed in the White House. Whilst being resolutely apolitical, she was, in her own way, a canny political operator, dropping occasional hints about what she thought. When the Scots were in the throes of the independence referendum campaign, she simply hinted to them to consider how they voted very carefully indeed. Talk about an iron hand wrapped in a velvet glove. And that summed her up. Authentic, elegant and discreet, all sustained by the quiet, firm and relentless power of her character. And whether it was the Harry and Meghan soap opera, Prince Andrew's scandals or Charles's divorce, she handled all of those things in the way that she handled everything else, with down-to-earth common sense, a steady determination and a stoic, very British instinct to keep calm and carry on. In the end, what does a head of state do? Well, they represent the nation. And with her humble, no-nonsense, fuss-free commitment, she was the very definition, the epitome of Britishness itself. She personified our history, our culture and our values, and she led by example as she listened to her Roberts radio every morning, sat next to her Ring heater, eating her cornflakes famously stored in Tupperware. Strangely majestic, strangely down to earth. What an impossible mix this woman was. So what is her legacy? Well, she's been a solid figurehead through wars, economic crises, natural disasters, health emergencies, terror attacks and more. And she's been a consistent steadying force at a time when our country and society has changed dramatically too. Britain is now a bold, creative, confident nation, a beacon of diversity and an economic and cultural powerhouse, all on her watch. And I think her greatest legacy is the monarchy itself and its continued existence. The royals remain stubbornly popular, now more than ever, as you can see in this live set of pictures coming from Westminster Hall, as thousands of people of all backgrounds queue around the hall to pay their respects. I like this tweet from a regular panellist on the show and a good friend of mine, best-selling author and Sun columnist Tony Parsons. He tweeted the following: "The crowds that queue for hours to see their Queen's coffin could not be more racially diverse. The faces of our country. They come from every race, every faith, and none. Our people, her people. When they tell you this country is a racist hellhole, please don't believe them." And with the international soft diplomatic power that our monarchy provides, and with the billions it brings in tourism, as well as being an integral part of brand Britain, the Queen leaves the institution in far better health than she found it. Her great achievement is that there is still a royal family. In the wrong hands, they'd be long gone by now, and we'd have some faceless elected president, God forbid. The Queen has given us so much, and we will never repay her. And she gives Queen Victoria, William Shakespeare and Winston Churchill a run for their money as our greatest ever Briton. She was both ordinary and extraordinary all at the same time. A one-off, and a gem that shone more brightly than any of the jewels in her crown. We will never see her like again, but her legacy will be with us forever. Thank you, ma'am. May you rest in peace. Was Queen Elizabeth II our greatest ever Brit? Let me know. Mark at gbnews.uk. Well done to producer Greg for getting the Q cam. We're going to keep an eye on that Q cam throughout the show. Thousands of people waiting to pay their respects to our wonderful monarch. The scenes have been remarkable. It's going to go on, of course, until Sunday evening. And we'll keep an eye on that queue. And we may even speak to a couple of people in the queue as the show goes on. Let's get reaction now to my big opinion monologue special all about the Queen. Delighted to welcome award-winning broadcaster Linda Jubilee, radio legend Neil Fox, and best-selling author Laura Dodsworth. Laura, let me start with you. Was the Queen our greatest ever Briton?
Oh, she's got to be up there as one of the greatest Britons, of course, and we're biased, aren't we, because she's been the Queen throughout our whole lives. I think that at the moment, as much as people are really sad about her passing, I think there's something else in the air. There's a sense of uncertainty that hangs in the air, because I think there's just a feeling that a whole era of Britain is also passing. There's an uncertainty what will follow, because she exemplified such incredible qualities: good sense, good humour, service, duty and fortitude. And I can't think of anyone else in our lives who has represented those qualities as well. And there's a feeling of what comes next for us as a country. Certainly the way this 10 days of mourning is going is really, really encouraging. Everything's being managed in such a stately and beautiful way. I mean, my goodness me, the British are just brilliant at queuing, aren't we? I think the queue's 5 miles now, and it really says it all that people will line up for her for, I think, 14 hours to visit her lying in state. I think that says everything.
It most certainly does. Linda Jubilee, I have the impression that the British people have renewed their vows with the monarchy.
I certainly think that's true, Mark, but let me be completely unequivocal about this. I think the Queen is the greatest Briton. There's no question about that on every level. The Queen is the longest-serving monarch in a monarchy that has lasted for 1,000 years. She's had 15 prime ministers serve under her, and she is, without a shadow of a doubt, as you have eloquently said in your monologue, the person who has led us through so many ups and downs. I think Elizabeth the Great is the greatest monarch, and I think that has really breathed new life into many people's view of the monarchy. No one's really sure how we're going to move forward with this under King Charles, but actually I think it's extraordinary to see the queue building up, the great level of there, really everyone prepared to queue for hour after hour just to pay their respects. I've never seen anything like it in my life, and I think everyone will remember her now with a great deal of love and respect and admiration also.
Yes, Neil Fox, the Queen hands on the monarchy in very good shape, better shape perhaps even than she found it.
Yeah, I mean, the world now, let's be honest, 70 years on, it is a very different place to when she became our Queen, to when she stopped being our monarch. But she has done an extraordinary job, and I would have to say I totally agree. She is, by a million miles, our greatest Briton ever. Just the 70 years. We probably never wanted to consider it before because she was still around. And I still think over these last 10 days, one of the greatest speeches ever made actually about Her Majesty, whether you love him or not, was made by Boris Johnson in the House of Commons the day after she died, which I think he just got everything spot in. It was 8 minutes of brilliance, actually, as a wonderful speech. But he sort of said everything that I was feeling and my friends were feeling. It's like your favourite grandmother had just gone. It's like you never... She was so perfect in so many ways and did her job so brilliantly and served us so well that you kind of thought it would just go on forever. Yeah. And then you suddenly realised in a moment of shock it had stopped. And I think this outpouring that we've seen over the last 10 days has, I think part of that, you suddenly realise there will be no one quite like her. You know, where she started to where she ends, those 70 years, the world changed so much, and she managed to somehow, with everything you said in your lovely monologue, take us through it all very gently in that strong, firm, but sort of dignified and calm way that she managed. And I think now we are thinking, I wonder what happens next. Charles has certainly learned from his mother everything about service and can see the respect that she's got, not just here, but globally, in how to manage things and what he needs to be, I think, as a monarch moving forward. But, you know, that's for next Tuesday. Until then, we've got to get through this weekend and Monday. And I think the eyes of the world will be looking on our amazing little island with kind of awe, actually, and slight envy at how we do things. We've got it all just right. And I think the queue and everything else and the way it's been organised, it's just the best of British. It's what makes us and our little island so revered around the world in so many ways. We've just got it right. And she will be so incredibly missed. But that will be an amazing day of history. We're watching it unfold in front of our eyes. And I think Monday will be the culmination of everything. And of course, this time we've been lucky enough to watch everything happen. We've watched the King be proclaimed. We've watched it all on TV. It's been played out so beautifully. It's like nothing's changed for hundreds of years, except we just got to watch it happen in front of our eyes. It's been amazing, actually. It makes me really proud to be British. It really
and you've put it so well, Neil. Amazing little island is exactly what we are. I do feel that this occasion has brought the country together to a certain extent, particularly Linda Jubilee, in relation to Tony Parsons' tweet about the diversity of those people queuing to pay their respects to Her Majesty.
That's right. I think the queue is emblematic because actually it's the great equaliser. I mean, apart from one or two exceptions that have entered the news arena over the last 24 hours. But we've seen people like David Beckham queuing. We've seen Theresa May and her husband queuing. We've seen young people, old people, all sorts of people queuing. And I think it tells its own story. And the story is that respect and the respect we have of the Queen has kind of made us all equal, just for now anyway.
Oh, that's a lovely sentiment. And Laura Dodsworth, before I come to Ken Wharf, Diana's former bodyguard, can we just reflect briefly on the character of the Queen? Because we talked about the institution so much, but she was a one-off. And I've just said there that she was this impossible mix of being very ordinary whilst extraordinary at the same time.
Well, she was extraordinary. And, you know, I was very fortunate to be working within Royal Protection. And on a number of occasions, you know, I had the privilege of meeting the Queen. So many people have said that she was such an easy person to get on with. And for most people, you know, she was completely out of touch. Nobody sort of had that chance of actually meeting her. What we see now, these sort of miles of people queuing that have never met the Queen but are prepared to stay out, you know, upwards of 10, 12 hours to just simply file past her coffin. And but they will do so because they have this sort of tremendous respect. When I was working there, we had this tremendous respect. But I always acknowledge, you know, and remember the fun that even our Queen could generate. And I remember one occasion in Sandringham, fun enough, when the Queen Mother was alive, we were all having a sort of a lunchtime at Wood Farm at the time, and the Queen Mother suddenly sort of stepped in with her sticks and said, "Is it possible to watch the 2:30 at Lingfield?"
This is wonderful.
At which point the Queen came in and said, "Mother, get out, let them have their lunch alone." Of course, we all started laughing, but, you know, it was that sort of very friendly approach that I think people remember. And exactly what Neil was saying, and everybody here tonight will just have these sort of very fond memories of a woman. And I think, you know, the King now, with the long-term apprenticeship that he's had, it's a very difficult act to follow. But I do think, actually, that I think the beginning so far, I think, puts him in a very good stead. And I think that he will take, certainly, a lot that his mother has shown already. I think is a
Well,
good...
yeah, and you last time you were on, you spoke very generously about Charles. You'll have known him well because you were there to protect both of his sons initially and then, of course, his wife, Diana. And you said, look, he's a really decent guy. He's very sincere. He has, you know, He's a human being, isn't he? He makes mistakes. Even in the last few days, he lost his rag over the fountain pen that started leaking. He has a short fuse, doesn't he? Do you think we'll see more of that?
Well, I think that was a classic Prince, and I think most people found that entertaining because, to be honest, I mean, traditionally, who would nowadays want inkwells? I was expecting some sort of feathers to come out, which was cut himself a quill to sign it off. But
maybe a pigeon would be nice.
Yeah, it could be. But I think that it's a new role for him, and I think.
And he wants everything to go perfectly.
I know, but politically, he's had a very, very active voice, particularly on matters to do with climate change and architecture. We know all that. Now, is he going to be silenced? In a way, I don't think he should be. I think that he's actually put across some very, very valid points, particularly about climate change. So he needs to find some way of convening and convincing Parliament that, OK, I'm now the king, but actually I haven't forgotten. I still have these views about certain things. But I think he'd be shrewd enough with the right advice to not disappear into the ether, not say something. But I do think that, I think that he has some very valid points.
But is that true? Because we know the Queen had views on everything, but she kept her counsel for 7 decades. Isn't the danger that if Charles speaks out about climate change, those who are concerned about the proposed measures will start to resent the monarch?
Well, I don't think so, Mark. I think that he can find a way. As I say, convening a way through to put these points across, to make sure that these things aren't forgotten. I mean, it's such a huge issue for all of us. And I don't think that he can, in his kingship, can just suddenly forget about that. Because he will...
But he'll have to do it. He'll have to do it differently, won't he? He'll have to do it with a light touch, I suppose.
Well, he'd do it. He could do it, through his son, through the Prince of Wales. He is about to inherit the Prince's trust and the duchy and so forth. He could become, his father, he could become the voice to making sure that all what the king thinks is actually moved through his son in the Prince of Wales. I mean, I think, that's what he's be thinking. I'm almost certain of that.
For sure. And just a final thought on the Queen as we reflect. It's the first time that this programme's been on air since her sad passing. So we're just reflecting on this human being. And we've talked a lot about the institution, the tradition, the history. We were just lucky that we got this woman, weren't we? This human being, this character, a very unique personality, just a one-off.
Well, a one-off almost, well, not by mistake. I mean, I think, when her father died, that was, really a sort of real change. But, what she did throughout her reign was, this sense of duty. Everyone keeps talking about a sense of duty and, non-political. But, she has, sort of harnessed this feeling of warmth with everybody. I mean, as I said, look at the thousands of people that have queued, not only to see her lying in state, and I've been at the media centre in London this last week, and there are literally thousands upon thousands of people. We talked last time, Mark, about the solemnity and the peace, the way that this is happening. I mean, from a security standpoint, the police have been very worried about this. Simply, how do we police, thousands upon thousands of people? But there have been very, very few incidents that have caused a problem. But because of the respect, generally, the public at large held the monarchy.
I think you're right. Apart from a few critics in the United States, the Republicans have very much wound their necks in, and rightly so. And that's a debate for another day. And of course, Monday is the funeral. You'll be going.
Well, I won't be at the funeral, Mark. No, I shall be commentating there with...
Oh, I see. You're covering it
exactly
for media. So you'll be in attendance, as it were, as an observer. But at the same time, you're connected to the family. You've worked for them for a long time at the highest level as Diana's bodyguard. What are your emotions about the day that lies ahead on Monday for you?
Well, my emotions will be for their family. I mean, and William and Harry particularly. I think William's already said in discussions with people at Sandringham today that, that walk behind Her Majesty recently reminded him so much of what it was like when his own mother died. I mean, and this, of course, is played out internationally on this sort of world stage. So it's, it's very difficult. But like all of the royal family that will be there in attendance on Monday, it is a duty, and it's what they are sort of effectively bred to do. And so that doesn't stop them thinking of how personal that is, or anybody else for that matter. It's it's a very public duty that I know that the King and his children and his own siblings will be there, and it will be in a very emotional time.
The boys have been reunited on this sad occasion. It's my impression that Harry could build bridges in the next few weeks, the months to come. But would it be your view that if the book is published, it's game over for the Duke of Sussex?
Well, this is interesting.
Is he in the last chance saloon?
Well, he could well be. I mean, this has been the centre of a discussion the last 24, 48 hours. My own view is, I mean, we're now told that this book is going to be delayed publication. I think that perhaps Harry should really reconsider, this book in total. And I think maybe because he's been welcomed by his brother, he's been welcomed by his father, and generally he's been given some very positive publicity. And I've looked closely at his face. I mean, I wouldn't say that he's a troubled man, but it's something that's giving him cause for concern, the fact that where he is, where his position within the royal family currently, the fact that he's not been able to wear the uniforms, given that his own military background and
10 years.
And the representation.
2 tours to Afghanistan.
Well, exactly. And I think, his father's been quite open about this. He wants him to be part of this new move forward, this new planned monarchy.
Slim down.
Exactly. And we had this discussion before, Mark, but currently Harry is not part of this triangle. But I just get a sense that these last few days, I think things could well change. I hope so for him. I hope so for his father and his brother. And, I'm not failing to mention Meghan, but, Meghan has to realise, too, that the role that he plays currently. And I think there's a great deal of thought to be had here. Yeah. Insofar as the book is concerned, though there will be those that say, yes, he should publish it. But I think at the moment, serious consideration should be given to not publishing it. People say, well, he's there to make money. OK, we all need money, but I don't think he needs that money, to be honest. I think that my own view is there'll be those that will disagree with me, and I do think that he should now seriously consider pulping the book. Yeah, pulping the book would be the price he might pay to save his relationship with his family and perhaps his future with the country. Well, it's because he needs to win the people back too, doesn't he? Yeah, well, he was an incredibly popular member of the British royal family. I mean, even right up at the time of his wedding. Yeah. He was a man that was the sort of global icon, and he was more popular than the Queen at one point. Yeah. He was very much the future. We all thought in that wedding at Windsor, as we said, with the gospel choir, and we've had this discussion before, the vicar that never stopped talking. It was an extraordinary time. Yes. And everyone thought, well, this guy is for the future. And Meghan was the new Diana. Well, if that's not an insulting thing to say. Well, I don't think it is. I mean, she was a Diana in the sense that she was popular. And, and beautiful and fresh and different. Yeah, there were parallels, weren't there? But that's not the case now. And there are a lot of critics and a lot of very negativity said about Meghan and Harry. But with not a great deal of evidence, but I understand the interest in the couple. But what about those howlers in the Oprah interview? I mean, you must have been horrified when you heard that. What? I mean, but contradicting the Archbishop of Canterbury about when they got married. Yeah. Allegations that couldn't be stood up in a court of law. Well, no, exactly. But then you have to, why did they give that interview? OK, I think that she wanted to give it, Meghan wanted to give it. Harry, when he came in halfway through that interview, looked decidedly uncomfortable in that. And I just know from the time that I spent with him, albeit when he was much younger, but he was born to be a prince. He was born to be part of this family. And sadly, he's not part of it at all. But I think he's reflecting quite deeply at the moment. Who knows where this might end up? I'm not going to predict anything, Mark, but I do think that this has been a real time of reflection for him. And I think the future is probably a little bit brighter for him now than it was before he came here. With almost 200 presidents and prime ministers visiting from around the world on Monday, this has got to be among the biggest security challenges in the history of this country. Well, I think it's been said all today. I think senior police officers and government officials said this is the biggest single event that we've ever had to police. 200 visiting personnel, VIPs. Including the small matter of the United States of America. Listen, there's no way that President Biden was going to get on a bus and travel to Westminster Abbey. But, you know, listen, I've worked with the Americans over many, many years, and we've always had a great reciprocal arrangement with the American Secret Service. You know, that side of it never worries me because they'll do their own thing wherever they go. Yeah. But look, one thing's for certain, that, you know, the Met Police, the government, the Secret Service have worked tirelessly over many, many years with this Operation London Bridge, and equally with many other sort of state functions. Yeah. We've been very successful. Given the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, that will convene on central London on Monday, yes, of course, there will be skirmishes, there will be minor outbreaks. But, you know, be rest assured, and I say this from my own work experience working with major operations, that, you know, and there's a huge cost implication, of course, but I don't know of any other service in this world that could police and front an operation like this and be successful.
Will there be concerns about protesters, the likes of Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain? Is that a concern? And what about the perennial threat of terror?
Well, there's always going to be the threat of terrorism. And, you know, I was speaking with someone this morning. You know, there is a concern about, you know, some terrorist act. It's the perfect occasion for somebody that wants to sort of hatch that sort of activity, given the occasion, given the publicity, etc. But, you know, this will all be part of Operation London Bridge that's been ongoing now for decades. And, you know, it was reviewed when I was serving. And so, you know, be rest assured, and everybody should be rest assured, that what has to be done will be done. And there may be a great deal of inconvenience to members of the public, you know, greater road closures, etc. I mean, when we look recently at this 10-mile queue that's been snaking its way around the Thames, you know, thankfully, you know, nothing has gone wrong there. Yeah. But because we've had to rely equally on sort of private security firms, because effectively the yard ran out of police officers. So that's how big this operation has become.
Yes, and we've seen, for example, the very, very competitive derby. It's not quite a derby, but it's an iconic rivalry in football. Man United Leeds has been postponed on Sunday because forces from around the country will be deployed to the capital.
Well, yes, I mean, it's great. The other day I was down at the media centre there and I saw officers from Dorset, officers from Wales. I mean, there's been a huge influx of police simply because...
The Met can't do this on their own,
well, of course they're not, even with a force of, you know, near 30,000. I mean, you know, it's a huge capital city. So we've had to draw from the resources of the constabularies. But what I've seen this time, which is the first time round, was of this use of private security firms, you know, to assist the police. We have no choice, Mark. Yeah. But I'm confident that this will go off without incident.
Yes, and please God, you're right. And of course, what is great in terms of the authorities, the government's handling of this, the Met Police, is that it's money, no object, to keep the people of this country safe as we mourn the passing of the Queen.
Mark, you cannot really, I think in this day and age, particularly with an event such as this, start putting a price on how do you police the monarch's funeral. It's irrelevant. You know, the facts, the actual manpower will be there at any cost, and that's why we've seen this draw in from the constabularies and you know, to police this event.
Ken, stick around, because later in the programme I want to ask you about how Charles is going to lead the country, what sort of king he's going to be, whether he's also going to be a more tactile monarch, more direct with the people of this country, hugs, kisses, that kind of thing. And also, was he right to fire 100 staff from Clarence House? We'll discuss that as well. Lots more to come from a man who knows the royal family intimately well, the remarkable Ken Wharf, Diana, Harry and William's former personal bodyguard. Now, our next guest is a man who had the privilege of dancing with Her Majesty, a former honour guard who met the Queen at Balmoral in 1977. Is that right, Tony Curran?
That's correct, Mark. Good evening.
Privileged to have you on the programme. So under what circumstances were you actually there at Balmoral?
Well, every year the royal family go up to Balmoral for about 6 to 8 weeks just to get away from the hustle and bustle of London life, for want of a better expression, and they go up there basically to let their hair down without any paparazzi or intrusions. And I was lucky enough to be chosen to be part of the honour guard to receive Her Majesty when she arrived at Balmoral for the Silver Jubilee year. That's the picture there. I'm second from the left. and the man on the right is Major Robin Hunt, who was the commander of the guard. And once the ceremonial duties were finished with, we basically went on the hill, helping the proper gillies, take down deer when they've been shot, pick up the grouse, and the Queen, God rest her, she puts on what they call the Gillies Ball, and 30 soldiers are invited, along with the gillies and other guests, to attend the ball in Balmoral. You turn up at 8 o'clock in the evening, you're there till midnight when the royal family depart and let you get on with sort of having a party. I was fortunate enough on 3 occasions to be on the hill with Her Majesty and the future King. I can't tell you exactly what went on, but put it like this, they were just like normal people. No airs and graces. And the first morning I met the Queen on the hill, one of our proper gillies was taking her rifles out the back of the Land Rover, and apparently she was a very good shot. And me and a couple of other guys on the hill, we couldn't believe that was the Queen, because she had the headscarf on, a long Barber jacket, a tartan skirt and wellies. Not the way we were used to seeing her. But we spent a good day on the hill. The next day I was on the hill with the future King, King Charles, when he was Prince of Wales. And he was out shooting the grouse, teaching a new gun dog how to go and collect the grouse once he'd shot them. Didn't go too well, shall we say. And it was a bit of a shock, shall we say, to hear the future King using words the common man would use, shall we say. And on another occasion, I happened to be in Victoria Barracks, which is a small barracks in close to Balmoral. And maybe Ken knows a bit about this from before his time, but the security people came into the barracks one day saying, "Have you seen His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh?" And the guard commander at the time told them no. He was actually in the sergeant's mess of the Queen's Own Highlanders, having a gin and tonic, I believe, and a half pint of tartan special, which you can't get anymore. So I've had that 6 weeks was absolutely fantastic. I went to the Gillies Ball. First dance was an Eightsome Reel. People who know Highland dance will know what that is. The second dance was a Paul Jones, I think it was called. And I was fortunate enough to land in between Her Majesty, the Prince Charles on my right, and the Duke of Edinburgh on my left. I always remember everybody else had started dancing and I was still standing there, because we had been told, under no circumstances do you dance with the Queen. Well, when she popped her head over to say good evening, what else could I do but have 3.5 minutes holding my Queen in my arms for a slow waltz? It was absolutely fantastic.
Tony, did you grab her or did she grab you?
I think she actually grabbed me, because I always remember standing ramrod at attention, and in my peripheral vision I could see everybody else had started dancing. I think the band leader that night, I think it was Jim McLeod and his band. But what a fabulous evening. It was, the whole 6 weeks I was there was just an absolute brilliant experience.
Tony, I wouldn't dare ask about the conversation you had with our late, great monarch, but you can tell me whether she was a good dancer. Could she move?
Oh, she was very good, yeah. And we all had to practice for a couple of weeks every morning at 6 o'clock in what we call PT kit. And I was obviously chosen because I sort of picked up a few of the dances quite well. But she knows her stuff. I always remember the first thing she said to me after good evening was, "Where do you come from?" I said, "I'm from Dundee." And she said, "Oh, shouldn't you be in the Black Watch?" which is another Scottish regiment. And she was absolutely right. Coming from Dundee, I should have joined the Black Watch. But my grandfather was a Seaforth Highlander in the First World War, and I'd always wanted to join the Seaforth, obviously, but they didn't exist when I was old enough to join the army. They had become my regiment, the Queen's Own Highlanders, which is the regimental badge I'm wearing on my jacket. That is our actual insignia.
Worn with pride, and what a great achievement it is, what you've achieved yourself, Tony, as an honour guard. You, at that same time in 1977, on that same trip, you mentioned you met our future king, Prince Charles, yeah. And he would have been in his early 30s. What were your impressions of this younger man?
Well, he, apart from looking a bit different now, he sounds and acts exactly the same. His girlfriend at the time, if I can mention that, was the Duke of Wellington's daughter, Lady Jane Wellesley. That's who he took to the ball. Obviously, that never came to fruition because he obviously met Diana a couple of years later. And we all know what happened there, so we won't go into that, shall we say?
Yeah. Listen, you're speaking to us from... are you in Aberdeen?
No, I'm in Culloden, near the battlefield.
You're in Culloden. Listen, beautiful part of Scotland. Do you think that King Charles can preserve the Union?
Well, the fact that his mother just passed away, she, without realising it, has probably made the Union even stronger, and he will definitely make it stronger. I think, and I hope he does. We don't need all this division in the UK, no matter where it's from, Northern Ireland, Wales or Scotland. We're the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that's the way it should stay.
Tony, the deepest privilege and joy to have you on the programme. Thank you for sharing your memories of the late, great Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, former Honour Guard who met the Queen at Balmoral and even enjoyed a dance with her. Tony Curran, thank you so much for your time. Well, let's head now to the United States, to Hollywood, California, and find out how this very sad story of the Queen's passing is going down stateside and just how many people will be watching the funeral on Monday. Let's speak to the Queen of US Royal Reporting. She's got a book coming out about the royal family, and of course she's the creator of the To Die For Daily royal website. Kinsey Schofield, welcome to the show.
Mark, your tribute to the Queen was one of the most beautiful I've seen over the last few days.
Thank you.
And I've been thinking of you because I know that you love this monarchy. So my heart has been hurting for you. So thank you so much for letting me come on to talk to you about the great Queen Elizabeth.
Well, look, thanks for your kind words. That monologue was easy to write because it came from the heart. And I know that, well, you've been a royal watcher since you were a little girl.
I have. And like you, I'm sure I just was absolutely shocked last week. I thought she was going to be with us forever. She was ours. I mean, I know that she's not my queen, but she is my adopted queen. And so I very much am devastated over the loss of Queen Elizabeth. And it's important to me that I'm there to mourn, and not only to mourn Queen Elizabeth, but to wish Prince Charles good luck, King Charles good luck, as he now reigns.
Yes. Thomas Markle Jr. spoke exclusively to Dan Wootton this week, Kinsey, and he described the Queen as the world's queen, that she belonged to everybody. Do you think there's something in that?
I do. She was such a kind force. She was reliable. I think it's so rare to see someone today that is so selfless and it's also, I mean, truly to me, and I know this is probably not a very, mainstream thing to say, but she was faith driven. I loved her relationship with God. I loved that she prayed on her knees. I loved that she was close to Billy Graham and she reached out to other people, maybe people that weren't even in her sphere spiritually, but she was inspired by their spirituality. And, so to me, I loved that aspect of Queen Elizabeth. And, yeah, I think that she is the world's queen because she didn't care what color you were. She didn't care who you were married to or what your job was. She judged people by their hearts. And even then, we never heard about it because she was so quiet about her opinions. But she seemed very welcoming and loving to everyone she encountered.
Now, the funeral's on Monday at 11 a.m. here in the UK. So on the East Coast, it will be very early morning, 6, 7 a.m. On the West Coast, the middle of the night, 3 or 4 a.m. So I suppose Americans will be waking up to the funeral or watching it later in the day.
Absolutely. This is something where all of the neighbors get together. If you're in an apartment complex, everybody's getting together in the common areas to collect and watch it with each other. I know that there are hotels here that are doing events overnight. Come on over. We're going to be doing a big event in the lobby. So it is one of those situations where people want to be together. They want to digest this together. They want to talk about what they're seeing, who they're seeing. It's strange that a death like this unites us in this way. But I do know that it's important for people. They want to get together. They want to remember her and they want to be a part of history. I don't think we've seen an event this big since Churchill in 1965. And it's people know that they likely won't see something as significant as this in their lifetime.
Speaking to Ken Wharf earlier, of course, he's with us in the studio for the duration of the programme, Kinsey. I got the impression from Ken that King Charles would like to heal the divisions within his family, that the door is still ajar for Prince Harry, if not open. What about Prince Andrew? We know that his reputation is in tatters, and rightly so, but do you think there's a way back for him to some degree in the reign of King Charles?
Okay, well, I did not realize you were going to ask me the tough questions today, Mark. You're usually much friendlier, and I'm going to forgive you for that. And also, I'm so jealous that you're with Ken. Please give him a kiss on the cheek for me. I love Ken Wharf. I think that this is a difficult situation because it's guilt by association when it comes to Prince Andrew. And while I would love for there to be unity, it does seem like, you know, Jeffrey Epstein is a predator, and you have got to watch who you stand next to, who you email, who you associate with. And if he says that he's not guilty of what he's accused of, then I'll believe you. But unfortunately, it is guilt by association, and Jeffrey Epstein has proven to be a predator.
Indeed so, and I think you handled that question very well, and frankly, even a lawyer could have stress-tested that answer and not found it wanting. Is it a surprise that Donald Trump wasn't invited to the funeral? He has been perpetually positive and vocal in his praise about the Queen. I mean, he's the biggest fan of our late, great Queen, Donald Trump.
He is the biggest fan. He was so smitten with her. He was so proud of every second he got to spend with her. And I actually really enjoy going back and watching the footage between the two of them. And this is, again, another example of Queen Elizabeth, no judgment, just being kind, showing somebody that it was controversial at the time, nothing but kindness. And I think we're really going to miss her in that aspect, that friendship that she brought our two countries together. She truly did. It was just, I don't know, I can't even imagine a world without her. And here we are, still a week later, and I'm still at a loss. But we do believe that he's not invited specifically because they're just flooded with people that are expected to come. I don't think that it's anything personal. I know he would be there if he could be. I think it's simply just there are a lot of people on the way there.
I think that's right, and I have it on good authority that he'll be paying his respects in the United States when the opportunity arises, and no doubt he'll speak about the Queen again. I'm sure he will. He spoke to Nigel Farage just a few days ago to reiterate his admiration for Elizabeth. Kinsey, you're on your way to the UK.
I am, yes, sir, and I hope I get the opportunity to see you because you're one of my favorite humans. But I'm on my way. I want to be with you guys as we say goodbye. I want to wish King Charles, a positive future, and I want to be with my people.
Well, we will welcome you with open arms, and we really enjoyed your contributions to Dan's show in the last few days, breakfast as well. You are a proper GB News favourite, and of course, the star of Mark Dolan tonight every Saturday at 10 o'clock. So, Kinsey, a safe trip over to London. Look forward to seeing you when you land. Kinsey Schofield there, the Queen of US showbiz and royal reporting. More from Ken Wharf in just a couple of minutes, the much-admired Ken Wharf by the looks of it. But let's catch up with my panel, award-winning journalist Linda Jubilee, who worked as today's royal correspondent for Radio 4 back in the day when it was good. The legendary radio icon and TV presenter Neil Fox, and author, journalist and filmmaker Laura Dodsworth. Of course, her bestseller, A State of Fear, is out now. A page-turner, if ever there was one. And let's talk, shall we, about Monday. Because I know, Laura, you're not the biggest fan of enforced behaviour. That's very much a theme of your book, behavioural science, all of the nudge techniques that were encouraged so that we'd stay in lockdown and keep masks on. And I know you don't want everyone to be forced to stay at home on Monday, but a lot of people will. A lot of people won't go to work. They'll either come down to central London or they'll watch the funeral on TV.
those are really interesting points to make. I mean, obviously, no one's going to be forced to do anything. People can visit London, and I believe millions of people will be. They can watch it on TV live, they can record it, watch it later, or do something entirely different. I'm going to be recording and watching some later. The thing is, for some people, there's something really moving and touching and important about sharing in a collective experience and collective grief. And if you're going to watch any form of pageantry, pomp and circumstance, this is the day to watch it. And I have no doubt in my bones whatsoever it will continue to be beautifully organised as it has been so far. You know, every detail's just been really spot on. When you watch it, you can't help but be enraptured by the sheer mystery and the archaic language and the religious and spiritual and political rituals. I mean, when you saw the accession, and I didn't even know what they're talking about half the time. It feels so archaic, but there's something that just draws you in. You know, the Queen wasn't just a queen. She wasn't just a mother and a grandmother. She's also an archetype. She's, in Jungian terms, she's the ruler. She's the great mother. We've known her all of our lives. So this is huge. So this is a big collective crowd to be part of. But there is also something else to do with that. You know, when you're in a collective crowd, you lose yourself a little bit. People will get really swept up in the emotion. This isn't a bad thing. You know, it's a really important state occasion. But yeah, there is. You know, there's crowd psychology at play too.
Yes, and it's interesting, isn't it? You've got... How many children do you have, Laura?
I've got two.
You've got two. I've got two as well. And I don't think they've given too much thought to the monarchy. I think if you ask my eldest, he'd say the Queen was cool. I think that's a word he would use. But it's not something that's on their radar hugely. But I want them to watch the funeral on Monday, to understand the significance of the Queen as a global figure, and also for a better understanding of their country.
Yeah, well, mine are going to watch it with me. We said we'd watch the highlights together, make an evening of it, so that, you know, they're teenagers. They're going to do their own thing during the day. Let's be realistic. We're not going to sit down and watch TV for 6 hours. But I think we all feel that it's a really big cultural occasion. It's very important for our amazing little country, as Neil Fox put it. And I don't think anyone should miss out on a part of that. Now, I'm not a royalist at all, but that doesn't mean I'm not enjoying this whole process. You know, the 10 days of mourning, the huge significance for our country, and just the stately beautifulness of it. But even if you're not a royalist, as I'm not, you can't fail to be moved by the trumpets and the vaulted arches and the flags. It touches you inside, you know, it touches you in your bones. And I think it's something for them to experience. It would be a pity to be alive on Monday and not partake of some of it, I think.
Indeed. Neil, are you on the radio on Monday morning?
I will be on the radio Monday morning. I think it's been a strange time being on the radio. Certainly the day afterwards on Friday was odd. But everyone, you didn't have to try and be respectful or try and be down, because the mood was there. You could feel it outside. You could feel the nation was shocked and saddened by the whole thing. But I'm going to be watching it. I have to say, you asked, you know, I have 3 children. One's away at uni, but I'll watch it with my eldest daughter, who's 21, and my youngest, who's 16, who both were... They shed a tear on Thursday night, and they called her a legend, and they said it's the service. They realised what service she had done for this nation for 70 years. I mean, it's quite hard to, you know, say to a 16-year-old, this woman has been doing this at that level and not put a foot wrong for 70 years. My entire life. She thinks I'm old. OK, me plus 9 years, she's been there doing this. It's been incredible. It's been faultless. And you mentioned the history and the pageantry, Laura, but, you know, I've met the Queen, I did meet the Queen on a few occasions, very lucky too. And I remember the first time I ever met the Queen, you know, here was this lady coming towards you that you sort of felt you knew because we'd seen her a million times on our TVs and being the Queen. And I remember she walked and I was going to speak to her thinking, that woman represents 1,000 years of history of our nation, of this little island, this amazing island. And you think of all the history that's happened from 1,000 years back, from the building of Westminster Abbey right up to the present day, the monarchy, and she represents, and she is part of that, has brought us through all that history. So it was incredible meeting her, but then she's just a lady. And I think when she died, that's what sort of shocked us all, really. You realise she's a woman. She was a human being just doing this extraordinary job. But I think Monday will be the greatest show on earth. If that doesn't sound too American.
No,
I think the way we do it, the way we do these things, every detail, as Laura said, has been immaculate, has been perfect. My brother, who was in the military that was his career for 27 years and still part of it, he said literally they've been practicing and updating Operation London Bridge for decades. Just every year they slightly tweak and change. So that military precision that we've got, the pomp, the pageantry, the history, I mean, nations like America, although they parted with us, will be looking with envy and awe because we have something that the rest of the world doesn't. And actually, the way our monarchy has run, some people who even aren't into the royals or maybe even a monarchy, you cannot be failed to be blown away by the influence that she has had globally on just the gentle way she has pushed certain agendas and just been there. It's been magnificent, actually, and it's been said many times that, Charles has enormous boots to fill, but good luck to him. But, I think there's a chance he could do an amazing job. It'll be very different from his mother, clearly, but he takes over at a very different time. This is 2022, not 1952. But
well, definitely
has been magnificent.
We'll be talking about what kind of king Charles is going to be, and in my take at 10, I think it's time for a promotion for Princess Anne, who is an absolute favourite of mine. Linda, before we get to the news headlines and a big hour to come on Mark Dolan tonight with the papers at 10:30, let me ask you, do you have plans for Monday?
I'm going to go to Windsor. And that's because I would like to have been in the queue, but I don't think I can join it soon enough to actually get to the top of the queue, because I do think they'll close it or suspend it. And I'm working tomorrow morning, and I think you'll need a good 12 hours to queue or a longer period of time. And I also think that Windsor is a town that's very close to my heart, and I know that it's a town that's was close to the Queen's heart. They're expecting 1.2 million people to go to Windsor, which is a huge number of people to go into what is a relatively small space. So I think there will be something special about being there as well. So I'm going to head off. It's not too far from where I live in Marlow, but I expect that my whole family, minus no one, will be watching on television. I've got 3 children. They all speak with the Queen, about the Queen, with due respect. And their father, who is an excellent television producer, I know will be watching, because Neil's right about this. These big events, and this is the biggest by far in our lifetime, they're tremendously difficult to actually film. They require a lot of planning, and in a way, they're pieces of history. So people will watch them because they want to see that unfurling in front of them. But I think for me, I just made a decision. I thought I would drive over to Windsor.
Well, Linda, you are a former royal contributor to the Today programme on Radio 4. Look forward to hearing many more of your insights in the next hour, alongside Neil Fox and Laura Dodsworth, plus Diana's former bodyguard, Ken Wharf, with us live in the studio. So much more to come, including my take at 10. So it's just gone 10 o'clock. More to come on Mark Dolan tonight. Now, in just a moment, the news headlines and my take at 10 monologue. It's time for the Princess Royal and to get a right royal promotion. Find out why in just a couple of minutes. But I've asked producer Greg to fire up the Q cam for the duration of the show, so we will occasionally just hook up with people or footage of those waiting to actually pay their respects to the Queen. I'm delighted to say, very good friend of the show, regular panellist on Mark Dolan tonight, dating expert and TV personality Nadia Essex has been in the queue for 7 hours. How close are you to our late, great monarch, Nadia?
7 hours? I got in this queue at 9:30 this morning. So it's now been over, where are we? It's over 12 hours. Yeah, okay. So I'm on what's famously called the zigzag.
How close are you? How many hours to go? Do we know?
They recommend about 2.5.
OK, well, I really hope so. First of all, how are your feet?
Sore. It's a lot of stop and starting. So that's the hardest part, is that you're the standing around. The walking's fine. I think I've done 30,000 steps so far.
OK, who's feeding you? What happens if you need a wee?
There are plenty of toilets, and all of the shops and bars along the route have been, come in, very, very helpful. There wasn't any refreshments for the first 5 hours. So we were in Southwark Park for 5 hours, and there was no refreshments available at all.
Well, listen, that's...
I hadn't even had my morning coffee.
Nadia, that's South London for you. Before you go, Nadia, really quickly, because we've got the headlines, but it's heroic that you're doing this, like so many thousands of Brits. Why have you chosen to stand in this queue for potentially 16 hours?
Well, we did it for Diana. Myself and my mum and my brother did it for Diana, and today it's myself, my mum and my son. And we thought we'd do it for the Queen. I didn't actually know it was going to be about 16 hours, to be honest with you, but we're in it now, and we're on the home stretch, so another couple of hours, and hopefully we're in.
We salute you. It's amazing that you're paying such a tribute to Elizabeth. I'm tempted to send you a little goodie bag from GBNews just to keep you going. Come and see us in the studio next week and tell us how it went.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Lovely Nadia Essex. There you go. Well, lots to get through. Next up in My Take at 10, I'll be talking about Princess Anne and the pivotal figure that I think she could be in Charles's monarchy. Find out why after the latest headlines, a little late to Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Mark. It is 6 minutes past 10. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The King, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex have held a vigil at the late Queen's coffin at Westminster Hall. Their heads were bowed throughout, with members of the public filing slowly past them. The vigil of the princes was met with a round of applause from the public outside of Westminster Hall shortly after. It's expected 8 of the Queen's grandchildren will hold a vigil tomorrow, and GB News understands the Duke of Sussex will be permitted to wear his military uniform at the King's request. The late monarch has been lying in state since Wednesday, and thousands of people have filed past to pay their final respects. These are live shots from Westminster Hall, where a steady flow of people continues to move past the Queen's coffin. The queue for those waiting to file past is now at least 19.5 hours, with cold overnight weather expected. Officials believe the Queen's funeral is expected to be the largest international event in the UK in decades, possibly ever. Well, earlier today, the King and Queen consort visited Wales, the King's first visit to the nation as monarch. Thousands of well-wishers lined the streets of Cardiff to catch a glimpse of the both of them. The trip is the final part of his tour of the four nations as king. At the Welsh Parliament, he received a motion of condolence and spoke of his mother's love for the country. The Prince and Princess of Wales met with Commonwealth troops earlier today at the Army Training Centre Pirbright. The troops have been deployed to assist in the Queen's funeral on Monday. The royals met with senior representatives from Canada, Australia and New Zealand to thank them for their assistance. Well, in other news now, authorities in Ukraine investigating evidence of a mass grave near the eastern city of Izium say most of the people buried there are civilians. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The city in the Kharkiv region has recently been liberated after 6 months of Russian occupation. The UN Human Rights Office is planning a trip to verify claims that at least 450 bodies are buried there. The Kremlin is denying targeting civilians or committing war crimes. But President Zelensky says an investigation is underway with international assistance and that there is evidence of Russian war crimes in those areas.
Unfortunately, this looks like a bloody soap opera. After Bucha, we're seeing similar sights in deoccupied regions of our country. In Itium, we found 450 dead people buried. But there are others, separate burials of many people, tortured people, entire families in certain areas.
TV online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. A busy hour to come. In my Take at 10 monologue in just a moment, find out why I think the deeply underrated Princess Anne deserves a promotion. She could be the jewel in King Charles's crown. With me to reflect on the preparations for the Queen's funeral on Monday is a man who knows her well, Diana and William and Harry's former personal bodyguard, Ken Worth, live in the studio. Plus, we've got the papers at 10:30 with full panel reaction and your emails, mark@gbnews.uk. I must get to those emails, but let's start with this. I'm a huge fan of lots of people. Footballer Harry Kane, come on you Spurs. Music icon Sir Elton John, total legend. And underrated royal superstar Princess Anne. You heard me right. This stoic, sensible, no-nonsense princess is the closest we now have to our late and beloved Queen. For decades, Princess Anne has gone about the job of representing the country, reaching out to communities and fulfilling her royal duties as well as anyone. Except, unlike her siblings, without fanfare, without drama, and without scandal. In terms of her mother, Anne really is a chip off the old block, hardworking and known for a gruelling, back-breaking schedule. Good-humoured and not in the least bit grand, Anne has always been the quiet star of this family. Well, with the deeply sad passing of her mother, it's time for her to make some noise. Like the bass player in a band, Anne's unobtrusive but important contribution to our monarchy has been keeping the royal beat going and keeping our monarchy in tune. Anne is a fine-looking woman, but who's known to recycle outfits for years. And she has no truck with spending thousands on the latest fashions. She's a woman of substance and a woman of action. In her youth, she was a respected equestrian, winning a gold medal in 1971 and 2 silver medals at the 1975 European Eventing Championships. In 1976, she became the first member of the British royal family to compete in the Olympic Games. The Princess Royal, as she's known, holds patronage in over 300 organisations, including WISE, Riders for Health and Carers Trust. Her charity work revolves around sports sciences, people with disabilities and health in developing countries. She's been associated with Save the Children for over 50 years and has visited a number of their projects. Her work resulted in her nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1990. So we mourn the passing of our Queen and celebrate the proclamation of a new king. But Charles must know that he's got to now navigate his own personal grief and guide the nation through choppy waters as we emerge from the pandemic and the economic shock since the Second World War. And he knows he needs help. Workaholic though he is, suffused to his core with a sense of royal duty, Charles is 73 and can't do all of this on his own. William and Kate will, of course, do some of the heavy lifting as Prince and Princesses of Wales. But I think that Princess Anne could be King Charles's secret weapon, his right-hand woman. Her experience, her energy, her enthusiasm, her wise judgment, her charm, and the respect with which she's held by the British people will serve the king well. It's my view that she must now be Charles's number 2. flying the flag for Britain at home and abroad, and helping Charles reimagine and reinvigorate the monarchy for a new century. Give her a new title, I say, give her a new role and unleash her potential. I'd like to see more of her and hear much more from her, so that she, perhaps like Prince Philip, can become an iconic figurehead of this family, serving the monarch and the nation. Princess Anne, it's time to take centre stage. It's time for your starring role. It's time for your close-up. With the arrival of King Charles, the Princess Royal deserves a right royal promotion. In just a moment, we'll speak to Diana's former personal bodyguard, Ken Wharf, who's with me in the studio. But first, let's speak to former editor of the Sunday Mirror newspaper, Fleet Street legend, Paul Connew. Paul, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Mark.
What's your view about Anne? Because I view her as the quiet star of this royal family, and I think it's time for her to get louder.
I agree with you. I once did a royal tour of Canada with her, and she's a remarkable woman, tremendous energy and a great way of treating people. She'd never loved journalists, although she likes to banter with them at times. And I'm sure she will be Charles's closest family advisor in the days to come, because there are tricky times ahead for Charles, many of them beginning with P words like public versus privacy, principle versus pragmatism, and Anne will certainly be a shoulder for him to lean on and a counsellor, even though ironically she can't, because she's a woman, she cannot be a counsellor of state under the rather archaic primogeniture rules, but that won't stop her from being someone that Charles relies on heavily. She's particularly interesting in the sense that she is, without doubt, the hardest working royal. She does an average of 400 royal engagements a year. I think she will be very much the unofficial royal face in Scotland at Balmoral, because she deeply loves Balmoral. And of course, she was the member of the family the Queen wanted to accompany her coffin. And I think you're going to have a situation where Anne will become more influential, even though it won't probably be in any sort of new title. But you saw her this evening at the vigil, and there she was, stoic, so dignified, and she is a remarkable woman. She also, for me, has come up with some of the best self-deprecating quotes of members of the royal family. You've mentioned her equestrian skills and her love of horses. Well, one of the quotes she said in one of her fairly rare interviews was that when people meet me, they expect me, to neigh, grind my teeth, paw the ground, and swish my tail, and it's not at all easy. I mean, she doesn't lack a sense of humour, even though at times she can seem stern-faced. She does have a sharp sense of humour.
Well, yes, and of course, history has played out to make Charles the king, but she could comfortably be queen, couldn't she? She's got the experience, and her record as a royal servant is flawless, I think. She's without scandal, she's not extravagant, and she is very similar, it seems, to her mother.
I think it's quite likely that Anne was someone who played a part in persuading Prince Charles to let Prince Harry wear his military uniform tomorrow when the grandchildren do their vigil. It's been suggested that she's a strong critic of Harry and Meghan. I'm sure to an extent she is, but she's also someone who I think is a bridge builder. And if it's a very big if, there's going to be a a permanent rapprochement, that's a very big if, as I say, between the Sussexes, and Prince William and the King, then I'm sure Anne will figure in that. She's also very aware of the importance of not becoming too much the celebrity royal family. She's warned privately and to a degree publicly about not being too active on social media, and there has to be this balance between populism and maintaining the mystique. So she's both a modernist and a traditionalist, and which is an interesting and difficult balancing act.
I think so. I think that the point is, Paul, that the public hold this woman in very high regard, and I think she's the secret weapon. I think she's not underused because, as you said, she's arguably the most active and hardworking royal, but I just think she needs more profile. So very briefly, Paul, what might a beefed-up role for Anne look like?
Well, as I've said, I think she will probably be the person who is seen more and more in Scotland, both because of her own love for it, but of course of the importance, of the monarchy in Scotland. But I think her role will be more behind the scenes, counselling the King. You have to remember as well that opinion polls regularly showed before the Queen's death that Princess Anne was only behind the Queen herself and William and Kate in the public's mind, as the most popular and respected royal. And that's not going to go backwards. It can only go forwards, I think. So I think her role will become, more high profile, but it'll be behind the scenes where it's an even bigger influence. And the King will, I'm sure, be relying quite heavily on his sister and her shrewd judgment.
Paul Connew, thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to catching up again in the near future. Former national newspaper editor of the Sunday Mirror, Fleet Street legend, Paul Connew. Well, I am a big fan of Anne's. Let's speak now to a man that has no doubt brushed shoulders with Anne over the years. Ken Wharf, Diana's former bodyguard. Tell me about Anne. Is it a case of what you see is what you get?
I think with your monologue, Mark, I think that if a private secretary's position becomes vacant with the Princess Anne, I think you've got the job.
Well, I meant every word. I've always loved this woman. I don't think she gets the credit she deserves.
No, well, I think Paul was right there. I mean, in terms of public engagements, throughout my time working within royalty protection, if there was a league of who's top, it was Princess Anne by far every single time.
In whose estimation?
Well, in virtually everyone's estimation, because all the engagements are logged and recorded, and a member of the royal family might go, let's say, to Birmingham and do 4 engagements. Princess Anne would go to Birmingham and do 10 engagements. Colleagues of mine that worked with her over many, many years, would always, sing her praises, not because of the work, because they were there to support her, but because of her hospitality, because of her sense of humour that Paul was talking about, and also her undying work ethic. She was destined to gain this sense of duty, but enjoyed her work. I remember going to Gatcombe, very early on when I was looking after William and Harry when they were young, I think about 6 and 4 respectively, and we'd leave, Highgrove, which was all very royal. And we'd arrive at Gatcombe, and it was like, you're lucky if you arrived at a stable. But such was the difference. The Princess Anne was sort of, very much a working kitchen, very much a working house. And, that's how she wanted to be. And if you wanted a cup of tea, you go and made it yourself. Well, this sort of stuff.
And her children were raised without royal heirs and graces,
weren't they? She was insistent that they didn't have any titles.
Yeah.
And, but, I did 1 or 2 engagements with her, but I can only recall, Mark, the goodwill that's always came from her protection officers that worked with her. I think particularly because of her work, her sense of duty again that we all talked about. And it's interesting what Paul was saying, that I think in terms of the future, given that we touched on the Duke of York and the abandonment of his charities, what the King has to do now is find some way of reassigning those charities, because charity work, charities rely heavily on royal patronages for finance, for cash. So I think in this sense, you know, all of those that the king has now in his sights to move the monarchy forward is going to look at reassigning, you know, charities. And I'm sure, you know, his sister, the Princess Royal, will be very much part of his management team to work this forward. And I agree totally. I think that she will now take on a very serious role here in moving the royal family forward into this century.
And I wouldn't wish to undermine Queen Camilla, who I think will do a brilliant job, and I'll be talking about her in my take at 10 tomorrow. I like Camilla. I think she's, she married Prince Charles under difficult circumstances, and I think she hasn't put a foot wrong since. But just Anne, with her integrity, her CV, her experience, I think she's earned a more prominent role. And of course, she's super active. She couldn't be busier. But I just, as I mentioned in the monologue, I'd like to hear more from her. I'd like more speeches, perhaps a beefed up role, a new title. Do you think any of these things are possible?
I'm sure anything is possible. But I remember, you know, throughout the 80s when, you know, Diana sort of took centre stage with the media coverage. And you know, I'm not so certain that the Princess Royal or Princess Anne was particularly liked all that. But you know, that's how it was. And so we saw less of her in that sense. But you know, I think times have changed. I actually always acknowledged the popularity that Diana had, and also the work that Diana did. And I think in the end they were friends. But you know, Princess Royal is a different person, Mark.
So she doesn't actually seek the limelight?
Well, I don't think so. Not at all. You know, she's not that sort of person. And I don't think that she'll change that now. She won't change at all. But I do think she will accept and understand the difficulties that her brother will be going through now, because you know he's in a different role now, and she's going to be an important voice for him in moving this family forward.
Very, very briefly, as I say, I've always admired her, and so many of our viewers love Princess Anne, and this is perhaps a moment for her to shine. And I like Paul's point about how, you know, the king can enjoy her support and wise counsel. Briefly, she comes across to some people as slightly aloof or even a little austere. Is that fair?
I think it's a bit unfair, really. I mean, I think there's very much of her father in. I mean, she's sort of, you know, she is a mimic. She is entertaining, and she's not averse to throwing the odd caustic aside at somebody. You know, because that's.
But she's not austere. I mean, does she enjoy a drink?
Well, I think they all enjoy a drink. I mean, they're all very hospitable, and they're all, you know, they offer their hospitality.
Are the Windsors quite social in that way?
Oh, I think they are. I think certainly. I mean, I can speak personally from the king and that side of the family, and I see no reason why, you know, Princess Anne's the same. My colleagues that work with her saying that she's incredibly generous with all her hospitality, which I think, to be fair, the royal family, you know, are, and you know, that's why we have, you know, the world effectively sort of coming together now to show their respect, because they relate to the Queen. I think most people relate, those that are royalists will relate to the British royal family.
Definitely. Ken, it's been a privilege to have you on the show tonight. Thank you for coming in. It's a really busy weekend for you, and an emotional weekend as well. And I'd like to wish you really good luck with your coverage of this sad occasion on Monday. I know you'll be working for the media, as you do so well. Do come back and see us soon.
Thanks, Mark.
Ken Wharf, Diana's former personal bodyguard. And now, as sovereign, the Queen was head of the armed forces, of course. Phil Campion, SAS hero and good friend of Mark Dolan tonight, joins us now, a man who spent years fighting for Queen and country. Hi, Phil.
How are you, Mark? You all right, buddy?
Really well. Great to have you on the show. Listen, Phil, a very sad occasion on Monday. Have you got plans?
I am going to try and head into the capital myself on Monday at some stage, I hope. Just what time, where, how far I'll be able to get, I don't really know at the moment. I know it's going to be a lot of people trying to get into town and pay their respects, but I very much hope to get somewhere a little bit closer than Southampton.
Phil, you've served in the armed forces with distinction, with courage and with expertise. To what extent were you doing it for the Queen?
You sign an oath of allegiance to the Queen on the very first. It's one of the very first things you do is sign that oath of allegiance, and it's not something that you do and just forget about. It's taken very seriously. It's you know, you've only got to look at what's going on right now and the part that the military are playing within what's going on right now to see exactly how the military and the royal family dovetail together.
Indeed. And of course, that's the point, isn't it? She held the country together and she was the figurehead of our armed forces. What are your thoughts about King Charles taking the reins? Will he inspire loyalty and courage in those serving this country in the military?
Yeah, I think he will. I think, you know, it's a tough job. Obviously, his mother has had the reins for such a long period of time. We've all got used to him as Prince Charles. Now he's King Charles. There's going to be a lot of changes, from the buttons on your jacket to the crowns on your head to all sorts. And I think, you know, it will take a little bit of time to get used to. But in terms of the fact that he is now the boss, he is the boss, and he's not there by default. He's there because that's rightfully where he deserves to be. And as far as the armed forces are concerned, I would imagine it's just a case of, right, crack on, fellas, you know?
Phil, always such a treat to have you on the show. Come and see us in the studio as soon as you can. SAS hero, best-selling author Phil Campion. Well, it's exactly 10:30, and therefore it's time for the papers. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday, we bring you a first look at the front pages. And let's start with the Daily Mail. And they're leading with the following. Vigil for Mama. And a king's solemn duty, write the Mail. Charles stands by his mother's coffin alongside his siblings in the sombre silence of Westminster Hall earlier this evening. Next up, the Weekends. 24-hour wait to see the Queen. That's not good news for Nadia Essex, is it? Charles III worried about how people will cope with the cost of living this winter. And in a non-funeral related story, mortgage hike for millions as the pound falls. New cost of living squeeze on Thursday, with the Bank of England set to raise interest rates again and considering an increase of up to 0.75 percentage points. Pound drops to a new 37-year low against the US dollar, driving up the cost of imported energy, lifting inflation, increasing the likelihood of a steep rate hike. Average homeowner with a $138,000 mortgage would face paying an extra £600 a year. Next up, the Independent newspaper. A steady stream of mourners waiting to see the Queen's coffin yesterday, despite warnings of cold weather. And also torture victims among bodies in a mass grave in Ukraine. A truly dreadful and horrific story coming from the ongoing troubles in Ukraine, the appalling invasion by Russia of that country. The Sun next. King and country say farewell. King Charles and the people of Britain came together last night at His Majesty's vigil by the coffin of the Queen. The public filling through Westminster Hall to pay their respects, and they saw Charles and his siblings stand guard. One said it was an amazing spectacle and such a privilege. There you go. That's the Sun newspaper. Telegraph next. Devotion to duty. Thousands endure 24-hour queue to honour the Queen's life of service as King and his siblings stand vigil. The Times. King's fears over rise of cost of living. That's a story that popped up in the Mail newspaper. King's fears, the King has expressed concerns the cost of living crisis is going to impact Brits this winter and promised to protect religious diversity in a sign of some of his priorities going forward. He told faith leaders earlier today his responsibility as sovereign was to defend the practicing of all religions, cultures, traditions and beliefs. I've got an email about that from Nikki, which I'm going to read in just a second. Meanwhile, Quentin Letts, the brilliant writer at The Times, has done a piece. Silence speaks volumes. Queen's children stand vigil at her coffin in emotional end to a week of national mourning. The Guardian next. Saudi prince's visit is a stain on the Queen's memory. This is obviously an ongoing talking point as to who should or shouldn't be invited to the funeral of the Queen on Monday. We know that China, or representatives of China, I believe the Vice President of China will be at the service on Monday, something we debated last night when I sat in for Mark Stein, and no doubt a debate that will continue. David Beckham joins 13-hour queue for Queen's lying in state. I'll discuss that with my panel very shortly. A few celebrities like David actually waited in line. Others jumped the queue. I'll be outing them shortly. Daily Express. We're with you always, Mom, an arresting photograph of the new king standing in front of the coffin of his much-loved and late mother. And the Daily Star with a classic headline, The QE2. Mourners queuing to pay respects to Her Majesty forms second massive queue to join the first massive queue. Mourners queuing to view the Queen's coffin defied calls to stop queuing and instead formed a second queue to go and visit the Queen. So what you've got is you've got a queue to join a queue, very British. Meanwhile, tearful England legend David Beckham also joined the queue. Well, he's a Brit himself. It's what we do, is it not? And those are your front pages. Now, I've had so many emails to the programme. I want to apologise because my priority is getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. It's been such a busy show, I haven't had a chance, but let's get started. Let's right that wrong, shall we? This from Nikki, who says, Dear Mark, did you forget to mention the Queen's faith, or was that deliberate? The reason she was so great is because she surrendered her ego to God. It was what was always paramount in her life, this belief that without him, none of us amounts to that much. That only by being in lockstep with him can we truly be ourselves, can truly be of service. This is why the Queen was so extraordinary. This is why she was such a great soul. Well, Nikki, you are so right, and thank you for making that massively important point about the Queen's faith. Absolutely. Look, let's have a look at a couple of other quick emails before we crack on with panel reaction to the papers. Bruce says, Mark, I agree with you wholeheartedly that Princess Anne needs promoting, but she deserves a rest after a lifetime of service. I was presented with an MBE from Princess Anne in 1998. I was struck by her beauty and friendliness and dedication to duty. In contrast, prior to meeting her, where I was naively expecting stuffiness and snobbiness, she was the complete opposite, putting me at ease instantly. And that is Bruce, who is formerly of the Army, 37 years. Look at that. Bruce Hobday, MBE. That's the kind of people watching GB News, the kind of people watching this show. You're all heroes to me, so keep those emails coming, and I'm going to catch up on lots of emails before the end of the programme, just before 11. So thank you for that, and apologies for not getting to them sooner. Let's get reaction to tomorrow's papers with my award-winning panel of Linda Jubilee, who worked for that brilliant newspaper Today. Do you remember that? She was their royal correspondent. It was the first colour newspaper in the country. So Linda will give her reaction. We're also joined by radio and TV legend Neil Fox, star of Nation Radio, by the way. The Fox surgery, early morning, 6 a.m, Neil?
6 till 10, yep. It shows the bags under the eyes.
You're the Peter Pan of radio, let me tell you. Don't know how you do it. Probably Botox. And legal highs. Also joining us, best-selling author and journalist Laura Dodsworth. Laura, if I could start with you. Amazing photography around this sad occasion. Front page of the Daily Mail, Vigil for Mama. And there is Charles with his head bowed in front of the Queen's coffin. Very much an image of majesty that we're going to be seeing on Monday, to which, in an odd way, we're looking forward.
Oh, gosh, gorgeous imagery. Well, you know, it lends itself to photography so beautifully. I haven't gone down there with my camera because there's too many of the world's greatest photographers. I don't want to compete and all that. But all the colours, the symmetry, the pageantry, it looks beautiful. I really wanted to talk about a different story, though,
sure,
Mark, which was King's fears over rising cost of living.
Yes.
And I think it's really important in a period of 10 days of mourning to be respectful and to save some issues for next week. But I do want to pick up on something that Ken was talking about earlier with you right at the top of the show. He talked about how maybe Prince Charles could pass the climate baton on to Prince William. And actually, you know, we're about to go into what could be a very difficult winter, another winter of discontent. And I do think there's a huge danger for the monarchy in descending into the political fray and talking too much about climate and net zero policy. I actually think it could be the undoing of the monarchy if they don't maintain the standards of the Queen, who held herself above that level of politics. Because if they're going to bang the drum for net zero policies, they're going to be associated with political policies which really are going to be associated with the impoverishment of ordinary people in this country. So I think that that's encouraging to hear that the King has fears about the cost of living, because we know that so much to do with the energy prices to do with climate and net zero, among more complicated issues. But I think that Prince William should be very careful about picking up that baton.
I think that's a really fair point, and we're not above debating it on the show because he is our new monarch, our new king, and he will be subjected to scrutiny like any other public figure, even on this occasion. I think the Queen is off limits for me this weekend, and she would be anyway, because I can't think of anything bad to say about her. But I am concerned by what Ken said in relation to net zero, because we can debate, can't we, all day long whether there is a climate crisis. I've got an open mind about it. I'm not an expert. But as you've said, policies to tackle supposed climate change are highly political because they will change our lives, because it will impact our living, how we actually live, the money we have, the taxes we pay, the freedom we have. And that's why it can't be in the gift of the monarch to actually conduct that conversation. It has to be our elected politicians, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The political goals are very contentious. They're very controversial. They're going to affect the standard of living of everybody in the country. I mean, I'm probably a bit less on the fence than you. I think that net zero policies in some way hold the ordinary people of this country in contempt. And so I think the monarch and the Prince of Wales have to be very careful about their involvement in this. There was a talk that the Prince of Wales gave on climate a couple of years ago, where the 3 feathers of his insignia, the Prince of Wales insignia, which are normally monochrome, were in the colours of the United Nations Sustainable Goals. And I thought that was really interesting. You know, the symbology of his regal status was actually overlaid with the colours of climate and sustainable goals. And that's really, that really shows his level of comfort in a way of being in that debate. And
attaching a royal brand to a political cause.
Literally, that was the symbolism of it. And Prince William has talked about planet placement.
Oh, well, his net zero speech at the Jubilee went down like a lead balloon. It was worse than Rod Stewart's rendition of Sweet Caroline.
Yeah, I think
it wasn't great, was it?
It was misplaced. It was probably the worst part of the Jubilee celebrations.
Yeah, I mean, I briefly, before I get to the others, I can't really imagine what's worse, which is either King Charles banging on about net zero or him making the Prince of Wales do it. William?
I think it would be a terrible mistake for the Prince of Wales, because he's got the potential to be a very dignified and well-loved monarch, and he shouldn't spoil it with stepping into the political fray.
No, because we've seen figures like the Archbishop of Canterbury do that. And again, that upsets people, because the Archbishop of Canterbury should be a spiritual leader, and yet he seems to have become very politicised too. So I think that perhaps the King should look at what's happened to Justin Welby and the absolute pelters that he's received in recent weeks and months for his political comments, including the Rwanda policy, which you can debate, can't you? The Rwanda policy, maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's a bad idea, but it's not in the gift of the Archbishop of Canterbury to speak out against it. And sort of ergo the same for the King.
Absolutely. Let's hope they've got some good advisors behind them.
Yeah. Well, Linda, what's your thought on this? I mean, has Charles already reneged on his promise to stay out of politics?
Well, I think he may have done slightly, but the trouble is that he's said an awful lot of things in the past, and he can't unsay them, and we can't unhear them. So there's a whole backlog of comments that have gone on. But let me say this. I think we are heading into a very, very difficult winter. It's hugely problematic for so many people, and that is because of the war in Ukraine, which has caused the rise in the price of gas. And that is the burden that we are going to be forced to carry. It is Putin weaponising gas, and it's the gas price and therefore the electricity price, therefore the energy bills, and that's what's putting the pressure on the country at the moment. And that's why Liz Truss acted on day 2 of her premiership, is to bring in support for people, which will cost billions and billions of pounds. Our children will still be dealing with that debt in 20 years' time. It is about the war in Ukraine. That's what's behind the winter of discontent that you talk about.
Sure.
Well, I think it's a lot more multifactorial than that. You know,
that's the principal
inflation isn't just down to
It is the principal. I mean, inflation was at unprecedented levels in recent historical terms before the invasion, because Western governments have printed money for fun, haven't they? I mean, in this country, £500 billion. And of course, another point perhaps worth making is that the lockdown policy, which some people think was the right thing to do,
is a disaster.
But looking back on it, the price we paid to pay healthy people to stay at home is such that it's harder now for the government to help people with the cost of living crisis.
And that was a huge burden. The price of the furlough scheme was a huge burden, but the price of this is more. I mean, this is causing the problem.
Yeah.
So I think we need to address that.
And do you think, I mean, well, you know, how does King Charles handle the cost of living crisis? Should he have a view?
He has mentioned it.
He doesn't want, I mean, none of us want anybody to suffer this winter. And you're right, we're definitely in for a winter of discontent. But is it something we want to hear from our monarch about?
I'm not sure that it is. I think that he should follow the Queen's rule and say absolutely nothing, make no comment at all, and even less, I don't think he should allow things to be transmitted through other people that are close to him, which he has done. He's done that on the immigration policy of this country as well, only within recent months.
Yeah, heard
less than a year ago.
Very loudly within earshot criticising the Rwanda policy.
Yes, exactly.
Now, my point is, and I keep coming back to Rwanda, you can think it's a disastrous policy, but it's just not in the gift of an unelected aristocrat to have a public view.
He shouldn't have a view on that. We've all got a view on the immigration policies in this country. I'm sure they're wide and varied and well-founded, some of them. But he should not have a public view on that.
No, and just on you know, these pronouncements, it's interesting that you know, we're having this conversation. How do you see this playing out? I mean, what were your memories of reporting on Prince Charles back in the day when you were at Today newspaper?
Well, I mean, I think that when I was a young reporter, I think the royal pack, as we knew them, and the legendary reporters like James Whittaker and Harry Arnold and Ken Worf will have known all those guys. In fact, I know he knows them. People like Richard Kay at the Daily Mail are highly respectful and respectable journalists. They did a great job in covering the royal family in this country, and they are part of the reason, it might not be the biggest part, but they are part of the reason why the royal family is held in such high esteem. I mean, I think the Daily Mail's done an excellent job with covering the royal family. I speak that as an ex-reporter from that newspaper as well.
No, I think they have, and they've read the public mood, because most people in this country support the monarchy. So was this in the late 80s, early 90s? When were you reporting on royal stories for Today?
I came in, Michael Shea signed off on my appointment, so he was the Queen's press secretary. He's in series 8, episode 8 of The Crown, actually, in the latest
Maybe
series.
you'll be in one of those episodes.
I sincerely hope not.
As a glamorous young reporter. Still glamorous, by the way. Still young.
No, sadly not. But I think, it was in that era of very iconic photographers and very iconic royal reporters. And it was enormous fun. It was enormous fun.
It was a time when the press, though, were also, and the royal family were letting the press in a little bit more. We were beginning to become a really televised nation. We were beginning to let the media in our lives a little bit more. So they had to learn to adapt. They didn't get everything right. I remember that sort of disastrous "it's a knockout" thing that happened. That was okay. So not everything was brilliant, but an awful lot of things they did get right, and I think they've learned over the years. Now we're in such an information generation with 24/7 news and everyone with a camera and a video camera on their phones now. It's going to be very hard for them to say anything anywhere and not have it captured. I mean, what you said, everything he said has been captured and filmed. You can't unsay it. It's very true now.
Well, definitely. Just a final thought from you, Neil, on the King's comments about the cost of living crisis. I mean, you know, it's a very, very human impulse to say, I don't want my subjects to suffer this winter. And then who would argue with that? That's not controversial. But the problem is, you know, reading between the lines, well, what's the message there? Does he want the government to borrow more money to give to more people? That's the issue with him commenting on this. It's like, well, what's your answer then? And that's when he strays into policy.
Well, what's very difficult, of course, you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. If someone asks you about this, you're not going to say, I have no view, because you look uncaring. Of course he's going to care, because there are people, millions of people, are going to find it very tough, heat or eat, this winter. I mean, it's hard at the moment because my views were slightly, I don't want it in a way, I'm not going to try and talk politics about King Charles right now, only because I'm still looking at that image of him standing in front of his mother's coffin. And there's a lot of me sort of goes, for them, we have to remember that as a nation, we're mourning this amazing woman and our monarch. But for there, it's mum, it's grandmother, it's granny and what have you. And even William just saying to whoever he said it to, God, walking behind her coffin reminded me of walking behind my mum's. For them, they've got to find a time to grieve about all of this, and to try and do it in private must be very hard. While at the same time, the eyes of the world are looking at every single move he makes, everything he says, and try to judge him on it. What's he going to be like as a king? We just need to get through this week, get past Monday.
I think the speech he made the day after was extremely good. It was incredibly well written and incredibly measured. And one of the things that struck me, and we've touched on the Harry and Meghan situation. I know we don't want to discuss that in any detail, but he dealt with that really, really well. He said, I love my son and his wife, and I am happy with the life they have chosen to lead overseas. Ends. That's how you deal with it. That was an expert job in communications. He just walled it off. He expressed his love for them, and he supported their life overseas. As we used to say when filing copy, point ends.
Nicely done, and point very well ended. Producer Greg has promised us a live queue cam. I wonder whether we can hook up with the many thousands of people queuing to pay their respects to the Queen at Westminster Hall. There you go, well done, Greg, and that is a live queue cam. And it's just such a spectacle. It moves quite quickly there, that line. You get a couple of seconds to pay your respects to the monarch, but it's an experience that will stay with people for the rest of their lives, and I can understand why they've done it, and full credit to them for doing it. It's not comfortable, hours on end, but
22 hours, they're saying now. The queue, though, it's about as British as you get. Now a queue for a queue. The queue has become a thing.
I'm ready for the third queue.
But it's also really harkens back to a really ancient tradition of pilgrimage.
I think so.
Somebody said to me, why doesn't the coffin just do a big, cavalcade around London? I said, but the point isn't just that people want to see the coffin. The point is that people want to make a pilgrimage.
True. Yeah, it's
I
very
know
true.
it's not strictly speaking a pilgrimage, but it's got that flavour about it. And then you want to arrive somewhere, and you're arriving in this beautiful 11th century building, and it's all stately and gorgeous. You don't want a car just to drive past you in the streets. So there's a sense of, you've done something arduous, and then you get something there. You get somewhere stately and tremendous. It has much more meaning.
I tell you, it made me think as well that I'm told that the coffin, when it heads towards Windsor, won't go on the M4. It's going to take all the little roads all the way there.
Oh, is that
so
right?
That people get a chance. And that's a little bit like a royal progress that we saw in the first Elizabethan age, where people were allowed to stand forward. And
wouldn't it be great if it went up the Thames? No, I'm just thinking back to then the
Gloriana.
But that would be magnificent.
Gloriana.
I do think, history won't really know. We won't really know how to judge this Elizabethan age until more time has passed. But,
Correct.
We're in this second Elizabethan age, aren't we? There's something really glorious about it.
There is.
Maybe we'll have to,
Well, you're right.
see how the
History
books
will
judge it.
judge, but I happen to think that we live in one of the greatest countries in the world, if not the greatest country in the world.
Yes, correct.
It's a beacon of diversity, of enterprise, of creativity. Is there a more tolerant and open country in the world than the UK?
I think.
Good luck naming one.
Well, the queue is a great example they've talked about. It's every kind of person is in that queue right now, waiting, and every age. It sort of represents everything about Britain.
It really does, as you say. And by the way, that echoes back to Tony Parsons, his excellent tweet earlier about that, Britain's got problems, and of course there is racism. It's the most evil thing, but that Britain is most likely the most tolerant country in the world. Is it not? Name me a country more open, more tolerant. But look, that's a debate for another day. Tony has picked up on a tweet from The Guardian. You won't believe this, folks. The Guardian, a writer at The Guardian, has tweeted the following. Don't be fooled. Queuing is actually Turkish. OK, and this is a writer called Atticus Bakelite writing for The Guardian. Don't be fooled. Queuing is actually Turkish. Well, Tony Parsons has commented saying, many thanks to The Guardian for reminding us that the wicked British should never get any credit for anything ever.
That's got to be parody. That has to be parody. It can't be true. Do you know, I think, though, the funny thing is, in some ways, we are a tremendously tolerant nation, but we've learnt a lot about which media institutions are friends and foe. I mean, on the day the Queen passed, the New York Times brought out this horribly bitter opinion piece about colonialism. And the thing is, they didn't just rustle it up on the day. They'll have commissioned it months or years before, maybe weeks before. But it's, you know, it's planned.
Yep.
And it's just astonishing that some people in the media, what they want to do as soon as the Queen's died is use it for their own agenda, either to beat the British down in one way or another.
Good luck with that, because that'll go
depressing.
down like a cup of cold sit with
Just
the
have
American public.
respect.
Well, it did.
And also, Nicola Sturgeon must be struggling at the moment, mustn't she, with that show of absolute support in Scotland. I was moved watching that coffin go across Scotland.
Forth Bridge.
when it oh, my
Forth
goodness.
Bridge? It was
and just the number of people stopped just on every
that was
road.
iconic, that show.
And then when it came into Edinburgh, it's been... Everything about it's been quite incredible.
I completely agree with you. Lots of emails coming in. Let's catch up on a couple of emails before we out those who jumped the queue to say goodbye to the Queen. Anne says the monarch should not get involved in politics. This is one of the main reasons that the Queen was so revered. I do agree with Laura Dodsworth. It could be the undoing of him. Protesters are already using King Charles to justify their actions. I love the Queen and was able to support her precisely because she was a head of state who did not preach at us. Also, Anne's a diamond and should be treated as a jewel in the crown. Makes our plain name a bit more cool too. Anne, you don't have a plain name. You've got a gorgeous name. Anne is positively regal, and thank you for watching. OK, look, we haven't got long to go. I will just say a couple of things. Robin, thank you, Mark, and all at GBNews for the fantastic, respectful coverage of the Queen's passing. Living in Sweden for the last 40 years and still a proud royalist. Look, we've had so much support from all of our viewers since the terrible news of the Queen's death broke. We could do nothing here at GB News without you. The emails, the support, you watching our output. So thanks for being on this journey with us. It's been a challenge for all of our teams to stay on air at this time. We couldn't have done it without you. Quick one on those who jumped the queue. So, Linda, David Beckham, queued for, I think, 11 hours.
What a triumph.
What a triumph. He's gone from zero to hero.
Oh, totally.
He's had a bit of bad press lately because of Qatar, as one of my emailers points out. Amy said, why are we celebrating Beckham being there? He's been to Qatar celebrating the future World Cup with their disgusting human rights record and homophobia. However, he is better than... Is it true Holly Willoughby and Philip Schofield jumped the queue?
Oh, come on, non-story. They were filming for This Morning.
Oh, I'll take that.
It's a This Morning segment, so why
We'll
not
take
strictly
that.
speaking normal journalists?
What about the MPs jumping the queue, Neil?
Well, did they jump the queue?
But the thing is, as argued, Anne Widdecombe argued that they work for Parliament, that that's actually essentially their workplace. It's been your workplace tonight. It's been a thrill to have all three of you. Linda, looking at the wrong person. Well done. Linda, Neil, Laura, thank you so much. Please come back and see us soon.
Thank you.
And thank you for your company as well. I'm back tomorrow night in my Big Opinion monologue. I'll be talking about the King, Charles, and what's in his inbox for the year to come. And in my Take at 10, I'll be talking about Queen Camilla. So thanks for watching. It's been a really busy show. We are live at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. Stick around because I'm doing headliners next. But we want to end how we started, remembering our late, great Queen. Good night.
Hello. The showers that some places saw through the day will ease overnight, leading to clear skies and a chilly feel as we start off Saturday. But actually, for many, Saturday is looking like a largely dry and sunny day. High pressure is moving in. As it does so, we'll see the winds easing and the shower activity easing, but we've still got this brisk breeze around the eastern flank of that high, and as a result, we'll still see some further showers into the north of Scotland and North Sea coasts of England through the night. Elsewhere, most